Hello there, how you doing today? I hope you're all well. Today we're going into r/pro revenge, where the revenge is oh so satisfying. If you enjoy the stories I have for you, remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and check out my links in the description. Now, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? Boss from hell gets what she deserves. I have been a people pleaser to a fault my whole life. I have been working in marketing for 10 plus years. Over the years, I've had my fair share of bosses who were good, average, and some sucked. There is one in particular who stood out as awful. This story is from about 5 years ago. Pamela was the VP of marketing and sales for a mid sized retailer. She started at the company a few years after I did, and if rumors were true, she was the fourth pick for the position, and was simply hired so the company could appease shareholders. I was a manager under her, and my whole job was to make sure the website and stores had their products merchandised properly, received all of their monthly sales materials, managed advertising, set up and managed the department's budget, PM'd all of the department projects and operations, created reporting on reflect sales, managed presentations, creative briefs for future projects, and so on. In short, I did her work and all the administrative grunt work to keep the department afloat. I managed all of this because I had access to her email and many times sent emails on her behalf to keep the department functioning. Pamela spent most of her time showing up after 10 a.m., taking business lunches, and planning company parties. I don't even know why we did those, but I planned those too, because, well, of course I did. I constantly questioned why she spent so much of our budget on these events when we didn't have the budget resources for any of it. Pamela told me to take from future months' budgets to pay for the current month's overspending. So at the start of every month, I had an original budget, and by the end of the month, I had to turn it into an edited budget, edited under Pamela's direction. That made it look like Pamela's spending was under control. This is important for later. I definitely made mistakes here and there being in charge of so many tasks, and constantly found myself working 12 hours days, split between in the office working after my kid went to bed. Weekend work was also done before my family woke up after they went to bed. During Pamela's first major holiday season, the sales were shit. Pamela kept changing her mind on all the visuals for the stores, kept bringing on new advertising and PR agencies to bring in sales. All of these companies consisted of her personal friends, of course, and ignored our buying and merchandise team's planned promotions for her own better ones. At this time, I had been dealing with an ongoing infection that turned into sepsis and was hospitalized. The doctors and my husband said it was due to the stress of work and that I needed to take a break. As I recovered, I realized how much I was hurting myself, my family, and even the company I worked for. Eventually, my old habits got to me and I got on my phone and checked mine and my boss's emails. What I found made my blood boil. First, I got a lovely bouquet of flowers from upper management wishing me well, and I knew that Pamela organized the delivery. She sent me her favorite flowers, of course. As I went to her inbox to put the receipt in the correct folder to send to accounting when I got back. At the top of her inbox from the past 3 days were emails clearly not related to business. What I found in her emails was Pamela emailing her personal friends, griping on how I can't just shake off sepsis and get back to work. She also complained that she couldn't find any of my notes, spreadsheets, or documents for any of the work she was technically in charge of. They were on our shared drive, labeled very clearly, by the way. Finally, I found an email where she sent a friend from a previous company asking for advice on how to bring in sales and save her job. In this long thread, this old colleague asked if there was anyone managing most of the work, and of course Pamela said I was. This colleague explained that clearly it was my mismanagement that was causing issues and that I could be blamed if sales didn't pull through by the end of the season. Pamela mentioned that I was in the hospital and repeated comments from her other email thread. This person said that she couldn't outright fire me because it would seem like retaliation because I needed to take emergency medical leave. But if Pamela could prove I was stealing from the company or misusing company resources, then she would have grounds to have me fired and use me as a scapegoat. Upon my return, Pamela called me into her office and was worried I was taking on too much and wanted to take work off my plate. She announced was taking my management the department budget off my plate. She asked me to only drop a small stack of invoices to accounting. Additionally, Pamela told me under no circumstances was I allowed to talk to accounting about anything regarding budgets. Also, if I had any concerns about the department or workload, I wasn't allowed to go to HR. I had to discuss it directly with Pamela. Oh yeah, I could see where this was going. Unfortunately for Pamela, I had built a rapport with Lois, who was our main accountant. Lois always said that she would do everything in her power to help me should I ask. Knowing this, I grabbed the stack of invoices off Pamela's desk to give to accounting. I also added the email threads I read while I was in the hospital, and the current unedited budget that Pamela hadn't touched yet for the month. I also found in my filing cabinet the hard copies of old budgets, with Pamela's handwriting on what numbers to change to balance our budget. Finally, I added an email from our first round of budget adjustments, where Pamela subtly threatened to put someone else in my job if I couldn't do what she asked. So I walked and dropped off the invoices to accounting when I bumped into Lois. She bought up invoices and I sternly looked at her and said, Pamela is the only one in our department that Lois is allowed to talk to about our budget and our invoices. Lois saw the suspiciously thick folder on her desk, gave a firm nod, and lovingly kicked me out of her office. Within the week, Pamela was fired. From what I understand, she had been continually job hopping for the past few years. The CEO and HR brought me in to personally apologize for everything I went through, and gave me a paid 1-week vacation to take at my discretion. Given other issues with this business, I left after another year. Which brings me to today. I am once again a manager for sales and marketing. I have a wonderful boss who trusts my business decisions and backs me up on practically everything. We are hiring my team for me to solely manage and direct. Today I looked through the applicants and found Pamela's resume sitting among dozens of others. I stared at her name, wondering how many other people share her name. Upon review, yep, it's her. She definitely fell down the corporate ladder, with VP of our old company being the highest title she earned, and to no surprise, she embellished her achievements, claiming the work I managed as her own, and claimed she generated an 87% sales growth during the holiday season at our previous company. As a people pleaser who firmly believes in giving everyone a chance, it has never been so satisfying to click disqualified. Edit. To those suggesting I interview her to see her reaction, I would have loved to see her face as she walked in, but I felt it would have risked my boss's trust in my decision-making ability. Maybe I'll send a personally worded rejection email. I don't know. A lawyer's pro-revenge on a wife-beater. Let's call him Joe. I have to call him something. The man I ruined. But I can't call him by his real name, so let's call him Joe. Joe was a wife beater. I was hired by Joe's brother-in-law, the brother of the wife Joe beat. My client was also Joe's ex-business partner. Aside from the whole "you beat up my sister" thing, my client had another beef with Joe. A serious business beef. My client took it to court and gave me the case to handle. Joe and his lawyers fought me long and hard. Joe was confident that his BS and outright perjury would carry the day. It had always worked before. His BS and his fists had won him a good settlement with his ex-wife, free of child support. So maybe he thought that threats and lies would carry the day once more. But he was wrong. And after the trial, I had a judgment against him. A big judgment. Far bigger than what he could pay. Joe twisted and he turned and he shimmied and he shaked, but after a while I'd located and taken all of his assets. It was easy, really. Joe had no thought of consequences, and so he didn't lawyer up until it was too late. If one of my clients ever sues you, you're in trouble. Because my clients lawyer up before they even know your name. But Joe didn't lawyer up until the process server threw the papers at his feet. And by then, it was far too late. I went through Joe's assets like a meat grinder. And after a while, Joe had but one property left. A house. And he clung to that house, for it was rented out as his sole source of income. Joe lived in the unfinished basement, and he survived on what the upstairs tenants paid him. He cashed their rent checks at payday loan places, paying hefty fees, but it was worth it, because he knew that I would garnish any bank account that he opened. Joe managed to hide his rental place from me for a while because he owned it through a numbered company, but my investigator found him one day, and he followed him home. Joe self-repped his way through the next stage, which took a couple of years while I punctured his corporate veils and his sad, sad efforts at a fraudulent conveyance. But in the end, I had his last house, the house where he lived in the unfinished basement. Joe stepped out one day to get a pack of cigarettes, and when he came back, the sheriff had changed the locks. "Can my client at least live in the basement?" Joe's lawyer said to me pro bono, because at this point Joe had nothing to pay lawyers. I knew the pro bono guy. He practiced law nearby. As I was talking to him, I could see pro bono's guy off his window across the parking lot from my office tower window. "Ask the purchaser," I said. "It's out of my hands." And it was. I told Joe's lawyer that the new owner, a nominee, one of my client's employees, wouldn't let him back into his cruddy basement apartment. Joe, a man who had owned this and that here and there, and all over town, just lost the last thing he owned on earth, except his truck. He still had his truck left. Joe's truck was his big-ass gas-guzzling beast that he drove around in. It was too old and frail to be worth seizing, so I let Joe keep it. And I was glad I did that, because now the truck was where Joe slept, until he made a mistake and lost his truck too. He lost his truck the day I got a phone call from the tenants at the house that Joe used to own. He came back and parked his truck across the driveway. The tenant said, adding that Joe had gone nuts. He'd parked his truck there in a rage, out of spite, and then walked into town saying he'd be back later to sleep in his truck. "Can you get around the truck?" I asked. The tenant could not. The driveway was blocked. I called one of the tow truck guys that I used to defend back in my criminal lawyer days, and in a couple of hours that truck was gone. Parked somewhere else. Somewhere special. in accordance with my specific instructions. My guy wants his truck back, the pro bono lawyer said the next day when he called me. Not happening, I said. I stood in my office 15 floors above the parking lot and looked down where I imagined my pro bono counterpart was standing in his office, facing the same lot. But you have no right to the truck, he said. He has no right to block a man's driveway, I replied. It was terrible, really, standing up high, pronouncing words that took away a man's final asset. The last thing he owned on earth. I imagine that this is what must be God's wrath feels like, before he strips a man of everything and sends him to hell. Are you really going to make me go to court over this? Said Pro Bono Guy. Do what you gotta do, I said. And Pro Bono Guy said his client was coming in the next day to sign an affidavit, and they were going to court to get his truck back. But I was unconcerned. The next day was bright, and the sun was shining, and it was 9 a.m. As I looked out the window and sipped my coffee, my phone rang. I picked up. It was Pro Bono Man. Why didn't you tell me that Joe's truck was parked right outside my office? His voice was tight, and I could tell that he must have been shaking with anger. Oh, is that so? I said, staring out at Joe's truck parked 15 stories below me. How careless of my bailiff to leave the truck where your client could easily take it back. I must really speak to him. Very funny. My client's gonna sue. No, he isn't. He's going to get in that truck and drive away right now. I told my tow guy to fill up the tank, and he gave it an oil change too. Gratis. Tell your client to get in his truck and drive off, and that if I ever see that truck again, I'll seize it to satisfy the rest of my client's judgment. The pro bono guy tried to argue, but I was firm, and then I put the phone down and picked up my coffee. A few minutes later, Joe walked out of his lawyer's office and over to his truck. As he walked, I saw there was no longer a bounce to his step. The joy had gone out of him. Joe wasn't the first guy I have ruined, and he won't be the last. But he is the only whose final ruin I witnessed from on high, from my office, and it was the most powerful experience of my life. Watching a man walk to his truck, knowing that I had stripped him of everything else he had, and that he owed his possession of his last asset, his truck, to my mercy. Joe drove away, his ancient truck spilling clouds of smoke from the exhaust. I was pretty sure I'd never hear from him again. And I never did. A story from a professor of mine. I remembered the story of a professor of mine told us one day during class, going on a tangent from something related to this. I will be vague about some details, partially to avoid identifying anyone, partially because, I'll be honest, it's been a while since I heard this story, and I don't remember it perfectly. When Henry, my professor, was about 16 years old, his parents bought him a car, or rather the husk of a very popular sports car that was thought to be beyond reasonable repair. Henry lived for that car. He took on summer jobs and saved up his allowance to buy parts to repair it. He pestered a neighbor who was a retired mechanic for help. Everything and around when he was 19. His work had borne fruit, and the car was as good as new with largely original parts, and some even custom-made parts. He loved that car like it was his firstborn son, and in some ways it was, or so he said. The work had been excessive and cost a fortune, swallowing up all the money from his jobs, allowances, birthday and Christmas presents, and so on. but he didn't mind. He was over the moon with it. He was torn between studying law or mechanics at this point, but eventually he decided for law. Studying law took up a lot of time, and he couldn't drive his car around as much anymore. And finally, he had no time for it at all anymore. His parents hit a bad spot financially, and eventually asked him if he was okay if they sold his car. It wasn't worth a fortune or anything, but an enthusiast would pay a nice sum for it. Eventually, Henry agreed, mostly because he wanted his parents to be well, but also because not being able to drive that car made him feel guilty, and he thought of someone taking good care of it made him happy. Eventually, two gentlemen showed up and exclaimed their interest for Henry's car. They came to take it for a test drive, and his parents agreed. 1 hour, just to see how it drove. They never came back. 2 weeks later, the car was found. These two people had taken it for a joyride into a remote area and managed to total it, driving into an old bridge. Somehow, neither of them were hurt badly enough to require immediate medical attention, so they just fled the scene. Henry's parents were apologetic beyond everything, but he just felt numb for a while before finally anger started to set in. Henry was on a track to finishing his law degree with flying colors, and he decided to put it to good use. He hired a private investigator who eventually, after several months of searching, managed to locate the two car thieves. As it turned out, they would not have been able to purchase this car anyway, and they just wanted a joyride. When they totaled it, they fled the scene to avoid legal repercussions. Now, Henry was angry, but he tried to be civil, contacted them as a lawyer, and offered them to pay him and his parents a sum he thought was fair, below the asking price of the car, and to leave it at that. There was no answer. He wrote and contacted them again, by phone this time. One of them screamed at him, and the other one told him to F off. So that was it, and Henry sued them. To make a long story full of legalese short, the two gentlemen lost the case and were sentenced to pay what the car would have cost if they bought it, plus additional compensation. They pretty much laughed it off because there was no way in hell they could afford that. Henry, however, had plans. You see, both of these gentlemen had steady jobs, although not well-paying ones, but they owned stuff. Cars, stereos, computers. So Henry had their possessions seized and auctioned off to pay what they had owed him. Since that wasn't enough, not by a long shot, he decided to wait until they thought he had forgotten about this. But he hadn't. Henry had kept tabs on them and waited until they started buying stuff again. Only minor things at first, a few CDs here, some artwork for their houses there, until it accumulated enough to warrant another seizure of goods and auctioning off of that stuff. They did not like this one bit and tried to dispute Henry's claim, saying he had set up an ironclad defense against it, and they lost. To quote him, "I kept tabs on them for years, and every time I thought they had it a little too good, I took their stuff." He did not bleed them dry, mind you, but he took pretty much everything from them that made their homes more than rooms to eat and sleep in. No cars, no artwork, nothing. Now, my grandpa, I wouldn't want to piss him off. And that's the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed the stories I had for you. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and check out my links in the description below. Now, without further ado, I will see you all next time. Hasta la pasta.